These three stories about three artistic geniuses blew my mind when I first heard them, and probably not for the reasons that you think. The first genius on my list is William Burroughs. Now, Burroughs was one of the greatest writers of the Beat generation and wrote the classic Naked Lunch. In 1951, Burroughs was living with his then common-law wife and child in Mexico. But their marriage was on the rocks, and they were both struggling to overcome drug addictions, and Burroughs was an open homosexual. Now, during this period, they were having a drinking session at a friend's apartment, with their child in the apartment as well, in the same room in fact. And during this drinking bout, Burroughs challenged his wife to basically participate in a William Tell act, where he would shoot a highball glass off the top of her head. However, according to Burroughs, the act went horribly wrong, and by accident, according to him, he shot her in the forehead. However, many people suspect that it wasn't such an accident after all. Now, rather than ever facing justice, Burroughs was on the contrary celebrated as a genius writer, being invited onto talk shows to give interviews. What's really weird about this is people seem to totally forget that he'd killed his wife, possibly even murdered his wife. His value as an artist seemed to outweigh his moral crimes. The second shocking story on my list concerns the artistic genius Benvenuto Cellini. Now, Cellini was one of the greatest sculptors and goldsmiths in the Renaissance period. He worked in Rome and Florence, and he made this beautiful sculpture of Perseus holding up the head of Medusa. Aside from being a great sculptor though, he was also a talented writer, and he wrote a very famous autobiography, which is often translated as My Life. In the autobiography, he describes the great patrons that he worked for, the kings and popes, but also how he made his artworks. Most importantly though, he describes the long litany of crimes and misdemeanors that he engaged in throughout his life, and he does so with great relish and a complete lack of remorse. Cellini was famous for his violently explosive personality, and the book is literally stuffed with murders, killings, and cases of sexual abuse. But one crime in particular really interests me, and this is his murder of a fellow goldsmith and rival, Pompeo de Capitaneis. This crime is so interesting because, well, like all others, he was remorseless, but this time he was caught and the Pope himself wanted Cellini to face justice. Yet when a new pope was elected 5 years later, Cellini was let off the hook because his artistic genius was seen as just so great that it would just not be right to prosecute him. So once again, his value as an artistic genius was seen to outweigh his moral crimes. And like Burroughs, he was let off and lived his later life in relative comfort. The third shocking story on my list concerns the artistic genius Lord Byron, who was a canonical romantic poet and a real titan of English literature. According to one of his mistresses, Caroline Lamb, he was mad, bad and dangerous to know. He was, according to one biographer that I've read, a depraved pansexual. But it's his relationship with his half-sister that's particularly interesting. Byron had a sexual and romantic relationship with his half-sister, and they even had a child together, and the British public knew all about it. In fact, they were so scandalised that he was forced to leave the country and to live in Geneva. However, this didn't stop people loving his art, and he was perhaps even more celebrated for being so scandalous. Now you may be asking, why is it that these three crimes in particular interest me? Well, it's because the public and people in authority and power knew all about them. Not only did they not want to punish these artistic geniuses, but often they saw these crimes as adding kind of salacious flavour to their artistic output. What really interests me though is that recent research in the psychology of creativity suggests that moral deviance and our artistic originality and genius may be intrinsically related. Maybe we can't separate them. So these psychologists discovered that people that score higher on creativity tests are far more likely to be self-centered, to have a lack of care for other people, are more likely to be dishonest and arrogant. And so there seems to be some connection between breaking the rules of aesthetics and producing original genius pieces of artwork and breaking the rules of morality and basically committing crimes and engaging in what we consider to be deviant. Now, I think it's really important to think about this because we value creativity so highly in our society. Just look at all these books telling us how to become more creative. We design educational curriculums to make children more creative. Businesses want to make their employees more creative. And when we design artificial intelligence now, there's a very strong push to make artificial intelligence way more creative. In fact, some people think that it's going to become the new artistic source of artistic genius. And looking even further into the future, it's quite possible that we might even be able to engineer our children to be more creative in a biological genetic sense. But if creativity is correlated with immorality, is this something we should really be pushing for, and how far should we push it? I want to end this video by asking you a question. If you had a big red button that you could press and it would end all immorality, so we would live in a peaceful, harmonious society, but if you press this button, you also end all creativity and all originality. So you'd have no more beautiful music, no more arts, no more films, no more Netflix series. Would you press this button? And if not, why not?